Hi guys, and welcome to another Simply Birding video. This one is on choosing bird call recording equipment. So many of you who've had to look at bird call recording as a hobby or expanding your birding into recording calls have probably seen an incredible array of equipment, from cheaper entry-level equipment right up to really high-end expensive equipment, both on the side of the recorders as well as the microphones and a whole bunch of other equipment in between. So firstly, just to add some context to the information I'm about to share, I'm speaking from the background of my training as an electrical engineer. So unfortunately, some of this video will be fairly technical, and it is important that you understand some of the array of information you will see on a specifications or data sheet when you want to buy a microphone or a recorder or whatever it may be. What I would recommend if you really do want to take your bird call recording seriously is get something like this textbook I have over here. So this is the Master Handbook of Acoustics. This is my old 2nd edition textbook. They're on 6th edition now, but in reality, sound hasn't changed the way it works since 2nd edition. So if you understand acoustics and how sound works at different wavelengths and so on, it will really help you in understanding how to capture bird calls to the best and truest quality possible. So you will hear a range of specifications and information spoken about, and a lot of it when it comes to recording bird calls are seemingly irrelevant, and I'll focus on a couple of key pieces of information and statistics you need to understand when choosing your equipment. So you'll hear things like total harmonic distortion and line voltages and distortion percentages, etc. All of these things are really, for the most part, unimportant when choosing bird call recording equipment. There's a couple of key factors you need to worry about, and we will discuss them as we go through this video, and really those are the things you need to be worried about. So first thing, let's start with the recorders. There are a wide range of recorders, and there are a lot of simple ways to get recording, and there are a lot of more advanced and better quality ways to record. So the simplest and easiest way that most people get into bird call recording nowadays is the good old mobile phone. You can use something like an iPhone or an Android phone, use the voice memo or whatever voice recording software there is, and point your microphone up in a tree and record the bird. The reality is you will get something usable. You can certainly hear some nice stuff on it. The noise levels in terms of hiss, which we'll get to just now, and the frequency response of the microphone is not that great, and it's certainly not directional. So if there are other birds calling, you're not going to have the bird that you're interested in louder than the others, which is where dedicated directional microphones come in bird call recording. So that's the first way to start. The next thing is when you start wanting to purchase a recorder. The single most important thing on a recorder is the signal to noise ratio. And to explain slightly technically what that is, in simple physics terms, in terms of electronics, the sound is coming through your recorder, and in the microchips and in the transistors within the microchips, some of the electrons of the current flow bounce around randomly, and this causes random frequencies, and that is heard as hiss. On a really low quality recorder, the hiss will be quite obvious, and simply put, it sounds like a hiss of a good old-fashioned radio that isn't tuned in on a station. The more of that hiss you have, the worse your recording sounds, and the harder it is to get rid of that hiss after you've purchased your equipment and started to record. Unfortunately, good signal to noise ratio is, simply put, expensive. Like digital cameras, if you want a digital camera that can record with very low noise in low light conditions, unfortunately the camera is going to cost you exorbitantly more than an ordinary entry-level digital camera generally aimed at taking pictures in good daylight. As you go up the scale, you get good increments in noise as you go up the scale fairly cheaply. Once you get up to the high end, like a fast car becomes exorbitantly more expensive than the car just below it as the performance improves. So really what you're looking for at a bare minimum on a recorder is something where your signal to noise ratio is about minus 120 dB or better. On birdforum.net, and I'll put the link in the comments section below, there's a very nice forum article where they list all of the well-known recorders and what their signal to noise ratios are. You'll find that at the bottom end of the scale, your cheaper Olympus recorders, some of your lower end Zoom recorders, they're great for louder sounds, meetings, recording live music, that sort of thing. But the moment you want to record something really soft like a bird call, you're going to run into problems with hiss. For me, and I'm going to show you some of the equipment I'm using for my bird call recording, I started off with the Marantz PMD 660. Very, very nice recorder. It's probably, I would say, the bare minimum you could get away with in terms of noise if you really want to take your recording seriously. This runs at about 120 dB signal to noise ratio, which is pretty excellent. Nowadays, this has unfortunately gone out of production. So if you could find it, you're probably looking at in the region of about 12,000 Rand. Really, really nice piece of equipment. Portable and works brilliantly in the field. I then moved on to, in terms of recommending something you guys will be able to at least source, I'm now using the Tascam DR100. The Mark II went out of production a little while ago. They've now got the Mark III. You're looking at in the region of about 16,000 Rand at current exchange rate. It's a whole 6 dB signal to noise ratio better than the Marantz. You will audibly hear how much softer the hiss in the background of your recordings are when you have to turn the gain up to record a bird call. Really, really impressive piece of equipment and half the size of the Marantz. So overall, when choosing a recorder, what you have to bear in mind is that key thing. That is the single most important thing. If you go for a small pocket recorder in the 2, 3, 4,000 Rand price range, it will work and your bird calls will be clear from a frequency range point of view. However, you're going to have hiss. And when you try and remove that hiss in post, you're going to find that it's going to start sounding weird. Unfortunately, that is is the trade-off of cost versus performance. At the upper end of the scale, if you go for something really world-class like the Sound Devices units, you're probably looking at in the region of about 70 to 80,000 Rand just for the recorder. They are world-class. That 132, 135 dB signal to noise ratio, there's nothing that comes even close. So that's really it with regards choosing your recorder. You really don't have to worry about all the other things like frequency response and so on. Every good recorder nowadays can record from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz and higher. Wave, MP3, it really doesn't matter the format you record in. What I would look for is a recorder that records to SD card, because they're widely available and readily affordable. My old Marantz uses a compact flash, which is unnecessarily expensive on the memory card side when recording bird calls. The other thing you do need to consider is the connection that you're using on the recorder. And this is quite important. So on a lot of the low-end recorders, you will find that they use a normal jack or auxiliary in. So it'll be a tiny little plug like that, like your headphone type jack. Firstly, they're not what's called balanced, so you inherently get more noise, and every bit of noise you can remove from your recording is absolutely vital. Secondly, it has to have a microphone in, not a line in. The output from a microphone is very low. If you plug it into a line in, you're going to get nothing. So you need to have a mic in. If you have to, from a cost perspective, make sure it's got a mic in with this little auxiliary jack. But first prize, you want this connection, which is called XLR or balanced. Without getting too technical, it does a whole bunch of fancy things on the cable to ensure that any noise introduced along the cable by outside electrical interference is eliminated and cancelled out when it gets into the recorder. So really, if you're going to record, you want to have something that has a balanced connection. On top of that, most decent mics are balanced, and if your recorder doesn't have a balanced connection, then you need to organize a preamp that goes balanced to line in, and it's really, really complicated and just more gear to carry around in the field. So that's it with regards recorders. Now we're going to go on to microphones, and there's a range of options available. What you need to bear in mind is that microphones to a sound recorder are like lenses to a photographer. There's a wide array of microphones, and they have different characteristics and different purposes in terms of how you use them. So I will start with the most practical, and again, there's a whole price point from low quality right to the high end equipment. The first thing before we look at the microphones themselves, there's something called frequency response. So this is how loud out of the microphone do your bass frequencies come out. What is the volume of the mid frequencies and what is the volume of the treble? You ideally want that frequency response curve to be as completely flat as possible. What that means is every single frequency comes out at a similar volume. The sound is as true as possible to the original sound coming in and will sound as lifelike and real as possible. Again, the flatter the response, unfortunately, the higher the price of the microphone. The other thing to note, every single microphone has a self noise. That is, like in the recorders, there's a hiss produced by the microphone. The lower the self noise, again, unfortunately, like everything good, same with photography, the price of the microphone rises. You can get your entry-level shotgun mics, these little Rode mics that go on top of cameras. The entry-level Rode NTG1, very good microphones. Frequency response not 100% flat, and they do produce more noise than the higher-end mics. And the higher up the scale you go, flatter response, better sound quality, lower noise. Unfortunately, that does come at a price. Your entry-level shotgun mics, you can get 1,000-2,000 Rand for the microphone. I would recommend, if you're going to take it really seriously, the bare minimum I would suggest you go for. So I'm using the Sennheiser ME67. Locally, it's weirdly priced. There's this piece on the front here, which is separate to the power unit. That's about 4,000 Rand, and about another 4,000 Rand for the power adapter. I don't know why the power adapter's the same price of the microphone. The whole thing will probably cost you about 8,000 Rand locally. You do need to get some sort of shock mount, because if you're holding the mic, that noise is going to come out on your recording. So you want some sort of shotgun mount to just remove the vibration. The other thing you're going to want is something to remove wind. Now I'm going to give you a bit of a tip here. You get very nice fancy blimp windshields, you get foam windshields. The blimp windshield is anywhere between 5,000 and 9,000 Rand. The reality is, without being funny, just use a simple, fairly heavy duty sock. The reality is, as the wind speed picks up, by the time the sock is no longer keeping the wind out, you get so much rustle from the grass and the leaves of the trees that your recording is pretty much unrecoverable from a good quality perspective anyway. So I would honestly say, if you're not going to splurge a fortune on a windshield, just really honestly use a sock. It's as simple as that. The next option, the older option before they developed the shotgun mic, is the good old-fashioned parabolic reflector. I've also got this Sony parabolic reflector. Very nice, and I'll get into the pros and cons of parabolics versus shotgun mics in a second. With this, you basically have to make sure that you put a normal omnidirectional mic that picks up all the way around, and you line it up with the mic here, and you'll put a microphone in the dish like that, and then you will record. What that does do is it gives you noiseless amplification. So if you've ever cupped your hands over your ears to hear sound better, and you can hear it makes it louder, the dish does that by reflecting the sound that comes in near the mic and bounces it onto the mic, and it gives you noiseless amplification. The drawback is, and I'll get to that in a moment, is when you're dealing with lower frequency sounds, and we'll get to the pros and cons of dishes versus shotguns in a moment and cover that. You will want to use a really good quality microphone in this dish, or any dish for that matter, because the reality is the dish doesn't make your sound good, the microphone does. So a couple of microphones I use, and I've got an array of them. So I've got these classic old Sennheiser MKH 105 and 405. These are vintage mics from the late 60s. Most movies that you would have heard recorded probably in the 60s and early 70s used these on set. They are really, really, really epic mics. You'll battle to find them these days, these old ones. The new ones, again, unfortunately, probably looking at about 15 to 17,000 Rand per mic, but they are mind-blowingly brilliant for low noise and brilliant reproduction of original sound. On a slightly lower end scale, I've got two of these AKG C3000s. You can put one of these in a dish. It's a large diaphragm studio condenser mic. So the way it handles high frequency sounds is absolutely beautiful. The reason I have two of these, when I want to do ambient stereo surround sound, I'll run two of these into my stereo recorder, put them each side panned left and right, and that'll give me a nice stereo recording. If you're ever going to use two mics to record stereo, make sure they're the same make and model so that you get the same tonal quality in each side. Otherwise, it could really sound strange if you've got one type of tonal quality in the left ear and another one in the right. So these are brilliant both for your dish as well as for stereo recordings. And finally, you want a pair of headphones. I wouldn't, when you're out in the field, worry about going and getting fancy Sennheiser or Bose headphones for several £1,000s. Ultimately, all you want to do is be able to hear what you're recording, and when you have to point a directional mark, that you're on the bird because the sound is as loud as possible. I just use an ordinary cheap pair of Volcano headphones that I got from a supermarket, and that's about it. So now, I mentioned choosing a shotgun mic over a dish, and there are pros and cons of both. Firstly, let's look at the dish. This was the first way people used to record. As I said, sound comes in, it amplifies it onto the microphone, you get noiseless, free amplification. Unfortunately, what it does do is it's prone to having a roll off or drop off in lower frequencies for smaller dishes. So without getting too technical, the lower frequency a sound, the longer the wavelength, so the greater the space in air it takes up. When the wavelength is too long to fit over the dish does not amplify it or make it directional. So if you've got a dish this size, for birds that are mid to high frequency, brilliant. As soon as you've got any bird that has lower frequency notes in its call, always low frequency in total, the low frequency sounds will not be directional, so this dish won't help. Worse than that, if your bird call's tonal range goes from some low frequency components to high, the higher portions will be amplified and focused onto the mic beautifully. The lower frequencies won't, and it's going to, unfortunately, quite horribly, color your sound and take a full, rich sounding bird and make it sound quite mid-rangey or tinny. The reality is, and if you look at some of the true pioneers of parabolic reflector recording, if you want to cover everything down to the booming call of an ostrich or bittern, unfortunately your dish has to be about 1.5 to 1.7 meters in diameter. It is a massive, massive dish to cover all those sounds properly. So use a dish by all means, but don't expect on the birds that have the lower frequency components to really get a good result. Again, they're dishes like the Tellinger dish, very good, and they cover a much wider frequency range. They're much bigger, and when you're wanting to carry a dish around the field that's nearly 1 meter in diameter, it does become quite cumbersome. Then we're going to look at the shotgun mics, and there are so many of them on the market. So what the shotgun mic does, without getting too technical, there's a microphone inside here, and it cancels the sound that comes from the side and makes it directional. The beauty of a shotgun mic is that it doesn't suffer the bass roll-off in directionality that the dish does. What it doesn't do is amplify free of charge in terms of noise, the incoming sound. So you can get away with a slightly cheaper microphone in a dish and not get too poor a noise performance. A shotgun mic will give you some noise unless you start going higher end, but it gives you a far truer reflection. So sounds coming from the side still maintain the same tonal quality. Far more practical to carry around, but a good shotgun mic is unfortunately not a cheap thing. And I mentioned on the recorder side of things, the Sound Devices recorder, which is the top of the range world-class recorder at about 70 to 80,000 Rand. Something like the Sennheiser MKH70, which is just about the world standard for outdoor broadcast and nature recording microphones. Locally, will set you back, unfortunately, about 35,000 Rand. You can even go to something like the Schups microphones, which are over 40,000 Rand. If you listen on Zeno Cantor, there are a couple of people recording with the Schups mics, but in reality, it's way out of most people's budget, although those recordings sound absolutely incredible. The one thing you need to look at when you're studying a shotgun mic is something called the polar pattern. What that is it tells you how loud the sound is around the microphone in a 360-degree field. What you want is you want it to look like a lobe, and as narrow a lobe as possible. So what that means is straight in front of the mic at 0 degrees, you've got your highest level possible. As you go round, the volume must drop off. If it was omnidirectional, it would be a perfect circle at 0 dB all the way around. The quicker that lobe tapers in, the less sound you get from the side, the more directional your microphone. And again, good directionality comes at a price. What you'll find on the cheaper microphones in the mid to high range, very directional. Look at the low bar or polar pattern, at least, for low frequencies, and you'll find that they're not nearly as directional. Again, the higher up the price point you go, the more directional that microphone is at all frequencies, not just the lower frequencies. So that in a nutshell, as complicated as it is, I hope it isn't too technically complicated for some of you beginners and those that don't have a technical background. By all means, if you have any questions, feel free to comment on the comment section and we will happily answer, give you guys advice. You can contact us, look for us on Facebook or email via simplybirding.com, and we'll happily advise on any piece of equipment. If you've seen something you want to buy and you want to know if it'll work for bird call recording, by all means, drop us a line, communicate us in some way, and we'll do our best to give you advice as to whether it meets your needs. And above all, as always, to keep this channel going, please can you like this video, comment on it, subscribe to the channel, and comment with anything you'd like to know in terms of any future videos, topics on identification or equipment that you'd like us to cover. And thanks for watching yet another Simply Birding video.